Hey guys, I'm Lisa, the Barefoot Pampered Chef, and I wanted to say a couple of things before I get started cooking. The first thing that I want to say, uh, and I know not very many people are watching me at this point in time, but hopefully this gets out to other people, is this whole quarantine thing. It's difficult, I know, but we're going to get through it. We have already been known as the generation who has social media, who uses social media for just about everything. And now we're just going to have to utilize it more to stay in touch with each other and help each other out. So I wanted to let you guys all know I suffer from anxiety and depression. I usually pull it off pretty well, but I do. And this quarantine has been really pretty hard on me because I'm all alone at home. My son is with his father for the last couple of days. And, I see my mom here and there, but that's about it. So it's just me. And I just wanted to tell you all that there's one thing that we all need to do in this, and that's just breathe. I don't know if you guys can see that over there, but just breathe. I'm actually going to put this on my refrigerator to remind me that during this whole entire thing, if I feel overwhelmed or anxious or anything, I need to take a step back and I need to breathe. Because as a country, we're going to make it through this. We are going to succeed, and we're putting things in place that are going to help us succeed. So just remember that. Right now, I want to show you how to make some meatloaf, because we're going to use up some of that shredded wheat that I have a lot of extra, and we're going to make zucchini fritters using some of that shredded wheat that I have left over. So with the meatloaf, you can use the shredded wheat. You could possibly use any type of wheat-based cereal. Personally, I like my meatloaf a little sweet, like I like my chili a little sweet. So if you had Raisin Bran, even this kind with some fruit in it, I think that would be just fine for using in this. Cheerios, Chex Mix, any kind of cereal that's kind of a wheat base to it is going to go over pretty well. So I'm making a big batch because actually my aunt, uncle, and my mom are coming over because we've all been around each other anyway. So they're coming over. So I'm making a double batch. And so this is 3 pounds of ground beef. So the regular recipe calls for 1.5 pounds of ground beef. And what I'm going to add to that is I'm going to make a little well here so it's easier to work with. And actually, before I do all that, I'm going to start my oven. So I'm going to put my oven on at 350. And so that will be all ready by the time that I get this meatloaf ready. So we're going to add 2 cups of shredded wheat. And so this is 1 cup per batch. So if you're doing a regular batch, it's 1.5 cups of, or 1.5 pounds of ground beef and 1 cup of shredded wheat. So we're going to dump that in. And as you notice here, I've got my tray with my mise en place, my stuff in place. And that's a great thing to do if you have kids helping you work. You can say, grab this. How many cups is that? All of my bowls are measured out so they can tell on the bowl how much of everything it is. So I've got about 1 cup of chopped onions here. And I like garlic, so I threw in a clove of garlic even though it's not on the recipe. So each batch would be about 1/4 cup to 1/2 of a cup of onions. So that's about, for me, that's about half of an onion chopped up there. And about a clove of garlic. Now we're going to add our seasonings. So we're going to mix all the kind of drier ingredients through. The seasonings for 1 batch is 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So I used my flavored salt and some cracked black pepper, as much as you want, as much or as little as you want. And then it calls for 1/4 teaspoon of poultry seasoning. Now, I couldn't find any of my old-fashioned poultry seasoning, which means that I need to go buy some more. I probably used it up at Christmas for my turkey. But I do have a cranberry-style poultry seasoning, so I'm using a cranberry-style poultry seasoning. So for my batch, I'm using 3 teaspoons of salt, probably about a teaspoon of cracked black pepper, and 1/2 teaspoon of poultry seasoning. So I'm going to pour all that in there. I kind of want to get this all incorporated before we add the wet ingredients, just so everything is distributed throughout the mixture. Okay, so for our wet ingredients, each batch that you're making calls for 1 egg. So of course I'm using 2 eggs. And each batch calls for 1 1/4 cup of milk. So I'm using 2 1/2 cups of milk. So I've got that pretty much all incorporated in there. I'm going to pour in my 2 1/2 cups of milk. Put that in my prep sink so I can wash it later. And I'm going to crack in my 2 eggs. All right. While this is sitting over here, I'm going to get my stuff in place really quickly for my zucchini fritters, because I have it sitting here so I can put it all on my tray. And that way I'm ready for my zucchini fritters as soon as I pop this in the oven. So we're going to mix this all together. And now meatloaf in itself, you can just cook it this way and serve it with ketchup or a glaze or something to that extent. This recipe didn't call for a glaze or to cover it in anything. I like putting a glaze on mine before I put it into the oven, so the glaze kind of bakes into the meatloaf itself. Now, if I needed to, this is mixing up pretty well, but if I needed to, I could dive into there. I have a pair of gloves that I could, mix this up with. But it's actually coming together fairly nicely without that. I know when I was in the VFW Ladies Auxiliary, we used to make, I don't know, it was like 40 pounds of meatloaf for the seniors. And it was amazing. Great group of women, very friendly. And we all got together one night and mixed up huge batches of meatloaf. And their meatloaf called for bacon. So you can use bacon in this. I was thinking about putting some bacon on top, but since my son isn't going to be here, I'm not going to kind of waste the bacon because he's the big bacon lover. So I've got this all nice and mixed up. You really don't want to over mix this, or it's the same as your dough. You're going to make a pretty tense meatloaf there. So I'm going to move this to the side really quick. I'm cooking mine in a sheet pan, in like a brownie pan. You can cook yours in a regular loaf pan. I'm just making a double batch, so I figured it would be better doing it this way. And I'm going to grease that pan fairly well. I'm using extra virgin olive oil spray. And I'm going to load up my pan with my meatloaf. And then I'll show you the glaze that I'm going to put on top of it. I actually made it the other day. And it's pretty much a pineapple glaze. It called for pineapple juice. All I had left over was some fresh pineapple. So I actually cooked it and then used my immersion blender and blended it into it. So you can use kind of a, oops, my counter's clean, it's okay. So you can use kind of a barbecue base. Mine is a brown sugar base with pineapple juice and ketchup and a couple other things in there, Worcestershire sauce. Whatever kind of topping you like on meatloaf, you can use. You can even just use plain ketchup or plain barbecue sauce if you would like. So I'm going to pat this down nicely. into this pan. I'm going to give my hands a good quick rinse here. Actually run this over to my other sink really quick. And we're going to pour on some of this glaze. So this is the glaze I made. I'm going to pour this on. I'm actually going to save some of the glaze for later so people can coat their own if they want it. I'm just going to put this glaze all over the top of this meatloaf so it's all nice and covered. And this is how the meatloaf looks. We're going to pop this in a 350-degree oven for about an hour. Now, we're going to make zucchini fritters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some extra virgin olive oil into my pan. You don't have to use too much. You can use a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil if you don't want to use the spray can. I've got about 3 small or medium zucchinis that I've grated up into this bowl. I've made sure there's not too much excess liquid by wrapping it in either a towel or a paper towel, putting it in a strainer and pushing down on it to get some of that excess liquid out of there. We are going to add, and I need another thing to stir with here. Okay, we are going to add in 1 or 3/4 of a cup of shredded wheat. Now, like I said, you could do that with breadcrumbs. You could do that with another type of cereal. Anything that you're going to use as a binder, cracker crumbs. I just happen to be using shredded wheat as a binder because I had a whole bunch left over. For seasoning, we're going to use, there's 1 clove of garlic in here and 1/2 of a cup of Parmesan. So we're going to pour that in. And then we're going to use just salt and pepper to taste. So, I don't know, I've got probably about 1/2 of a teaspoon of salt and 1/2 of a teaspoon of black pepper in there. Maybe a little less. And then as our complete binder, we're going to use 1 egg. So we're going to mix all this up. And while I'm mixing that up, I'm going to heat up my pan. I'm going to leave it on about medium. Make sure that egg gets all throughout these. Zucchini is great for different dishes. There's a zucchini quiche that my friend Becky taught me how to make that I use quite frequently. You can do zucchini in muffins. It's a really easy way to kind of hide a good vegetable for kids. Make sure all this binds together. Okay, so I'm going to wash my hands one more time here because I'm going to use my scoop and my hands to kind of make these into little balls. And I'm going to flatten them into a little patty and put them into my pan. My pan isn't hot enough right now because when I put these in, it should be sizzling. Turn it up a little bit here. But what you want to do is you want to make kind of small patties. Press them into a little patty in your hand. And you can hear them kind of sizzling, starting to sizzle now. And we're going to cook them for about 3 to 4 minutes per side. So I'm going to do 4 here to kind of show you. And as I always say, if you're doing something in the kitchen and you make a mistake, that's fine. You're never going to cook without making a mistake. So say these broke up in the pan and they didn't form nice, neat little patties. All is not lost. Just make them into some other type of a dish. Make them into a hash. You know, add some hashed brown potatoes if you have some frozen ones. Add a little bit of a meat, and you can make them into kind of a ragu. Add some tomato sauce, and you can make them into a stew and throw it with a pasta. There is no real mistakes in cooking. You just have to figure out how to make it turn out the way you want it, or turn out some other way. The only thing is if you like really burn something, there's not a lot that you can do about that. But anyone can cook if you take a lesson from Ratatouille there. So we're going to see if these want to flip. They're getting there. It hasn't really been 3 to 4 minutes on this side yet. While we're doing that, I'm going to show you really quickly here. We're going to make a dipping sauce for these fritters. So I've just got about, there's probably about, I don't know, a cup left of my Greek yogurt here. I'm going to go grab a spoon. So I've got plain Greek yogurt. Make sure I mix that up fairly well. Flip these because they're starting to smell like they want to burn a little bit there, which is fine. I'll show you how they look in a second. Turn that heat down. And we're going to add some dill to this Greek yogurt. So I've got dried dill. Most of the time, if you're using a dry versus a fresh herb, you want to do a 3-to-1 ratio. So you're going to use 3 times the amount of fresh herbs to 1 part of the dried herbs. So if it calls for 3 tablespoons of fresh herbs, you'd want to use a little bit less than 1 tablespoon of your dried herbs. All right. Let me flip these out on the plate here and I'll show you how they look. This is a recipe you might want to play with a little bit. I might want to add a little bit more egg if they're not binding as well. Possibly a little bit more of my wheat product to make them bind a little bit better. But they look pretty good. They're almost like a potato pancake. Kind of a latke kind of a thing going on there. So the recipe for the zucchini fritters is about 3 small zucchini grated. We're going to do 3/4 cup of shredded wheat, or like we talked about, some sort of cereal, some sort of cracker crumb, something to that extent that's going to bind that up, some sort of breadcrumb. 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese, 1 clove of garlic, 1 whole egg, some salt and pepper to taste. We're going to take those, we're going to make up the mixture, form it into patties, and put it in our skillet for 3 to 4 minutes each side. The other recipe that we made is the batch of meatloaf. So 1 batch of meatloaf is 1.5 pounds of ground beef. We're going to do 1 cup of shredded wheat. And like we talked about, you can use any type of wheat-based cereal. You can use cracker crumbs. You can use breadcrumbs. Whatever you happen to have on hand that is that bread-like consistency that's going to soak up things and create a binding. We're going to use about 1/4 to 1/2 cup of onions. Depending on how much you like onions, you can use whatever you want for that. 1 1/4 cups of milk, 1 egg, 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, about a pinch of pepper, which to me a pinch is less than 1/8 teaspoon. If you really like pepper like I do, I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And then 1/4 teaspoon of poultry seasoning. We're going to mix all that together, put it in a pan. You can throw whatever type of glaze you want on it or leave it unglazed and eat it with ketchup later. And we're going to put that in 350 oven for about an hour. So hopefully you guys like these recipes. I'm going to be doing a lot more since we're all kind of on lockdown until April 6th. Let me know if there's something that you want me to demo or something your kids want me to demo or anything. Go ahead and share my videos. You can share them on my YouTube page more easily than you can on Facebook. So it's the YouTube website, the Barefoot Pampered Chef. So you should be able to find that pretty well. And remember, we're going to make it through this. We just need to breathe. Just breathe. 10 feet away from each other, but just breathe. So if a person like me with anxiety and depression can get through this one day at a time, then you guys can get through it one day at a time. So stick with me. We'll keep cooking. I have a lot of time on my hands, so anything. I can bake, I can cook. If you want me to make some sort of science project that your kid experimented with, let me know. I could probably do a video on that as well. So hopefully everyone is doing fine and we are going to make it through. And go home, stay at home, make some zucchini and some meatloaf and go from there. Bye guys.